Robert, Eva, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having us.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, we are fired up. I'm really excited to have both Robert and Eva. Before we dive into the questions, Robert, I just want to say thank you to both of you. We were just talking about this a moment ago, where Eva here she's been on the podcast most recently, and she sent me your book, and we're definitely going to be talking a great deal about this, The Plant-Based Athlete, a New York Times best-selling book. And it came at the perfect time for me because I just started my vegan journey about 38 days ago. And so Eva sent this book to me, and it was a great source of information and inspiration and just the possibilities. So I want to say thank you first to Eva, and also thank you, Robert, for writing this book. And I have a lot of questions about the book. And so what I was thinking was, if we could go back to the third grade. So if I understand correctly, you've had a passion for writing for a very long time.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It seemed like it started back in the third grade. Tell us, how did it get started with respect to this love that you've had with writing?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I don't get to talk about that very often. It started for me in Mrs. Young's third grade class at Lincoln Elementary School in 1988. We were assigned these projects to write stories, to write books. And this was obviously back in the late 80s. And it was really cool that our teacher actually laminated the books, spiral bound them, made them feel real. And I was a storyteller. I love telling stories. It's just what I have always enjoyed doing. And so I wrote stories. I wrote stories about playing basketball. I wrote stories about dinosaurs. I wrote mystery stories. I still have almost all of them. I still have almost all of them in my basement, in a little plastic container. And it was something that I realized that, this is what I want to keep doing. Like, I really enjoy it. I feel alive doing this. Like, this brings me some sort of joy or fulfillment or reward, or just fun. I mean, as an 8-year-old, this was just fun for me. And so I continued that. I went into, I'm sure I took a little bit of a break in middle school and, pursued some other things, sports and all of that. But even in high school, I had my own one-on-one writing coach, which is, nobody does that in high school when you're 15, 16, 17 years old. And instead of hanging out with your buddies, you meet with a teacher for a period or your lunch break or whatever, and write and go over it. And so I did that. And I even wrote a 100-page book when I was a teenager. It was never published, of course, but I wrote it. It was a decent length. It was a fun children's adventure story. And I continued that into my 20s, writing everything from children's books to adventure stories and all of that. And then it was finally this vegan bodybuilding lifestyle that gave me a vehicle to write something that was eventually published. Right. And now here I am, I guess we're almost, 34 years later from that time that I decided to do that. I'm on my 5th book, and it did make the New York Times bestseller list, which is, I tell people it made it last, a few months ago. So it was 33 years in the making. It took this belief in self and this dream that just I never let go of it. Like, that was something that I wasn't willing to let go. I let go of the dream of being in the NBA. I let go of that one. Not much I could do there. I did make the NBA, but I really wanted to do something with writing, and just fortunate that I had this unique opportunity.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to 2013. I want to go back. We'll go back to when you were 15 and when you made this choice to become vegan. If I heard correctly, back in 2013, you were seeking to get some of your books published with a publishing company that didn't work out. Is that correct? And talk to us about that process. I'm always fascinated. I love books. Eva loves books. We all love books. But I'm always curious, how did you handle that initial rejection? Did you only talk to one publishing company? Did you send it out to multiple people? I know, Tim Ferriss, he sent his book, The 4-Hour Work Week, to 25 or 26 publishing companies. Walk us through that process for you and how that helped you to get to where you are now.
Yeah, well, Benjamin, actually started a little bit earlier than that.
Okay.
It started in 2008,
Gotcha.
where I wrote this book called Take Action to Make It Happen, a 300-page personal development book self-help motivational book, similar to, or at least in my mind, similar to like a Tony Robbins type book. But clearly I was this vegan fitness person. I'd been on a speaking tour since 2005 at that point. I filmed a documentary in 2005 called Vegan Fitness Built Naturally, sold 1,000 or 2,000 DVDs, but I went around touring talking about the story of transformation from skinny farm kid to champion vegan bodybuilder. So I wrote this personal development book because that's what I enjoyed doing. And I landed an agent, and we shopped it around to, I think, just about 25 publishers or so. And it was turned down by every single one. And I was actually at my friend's house, another amazing vegan athlete, Brendan Brazier. He was in my documentary. He was a good friend. I was actually at his house talking to him when I got my final rejection letter, and it was from his publisher. And he's, Eva may know this, from the vegan athlete community. Brendan is not the most extroverted, he's very quiet, reserved, only really says the words he needs to say. And he spun his chair around, and looked at me and he said, Robert, nobody knows you as this motivational guy. Yeah, you have fun out there on stage, talking to people, but nobody knows you. People know you as a vegan bodybuilder. You got to write about that. I said, I don't want to write about that. Like, I don't want to have to look up all these, studies and references and citations. And I just want to write, just flow. But I decided, okay, I'm going to write. So I wrote this vegan bodybuilding book, and I finished it, but I didn't have an agent at this time anymore. And it wasn't really that mass market kind of thing. It was something to be self-published, but I didn't have the money to do it. So my boss at the time lent me the money, so I could, about $6,000 or so I could publish it.
Wow.
And so I did, and that book did its thing. And then fast forward to 2013, I was ready to try to step it up a notch. And actually, I wrote the proposal for this book for the Plant-Based Athlete
in 2013.
And 13.
Wow.
I had multiple people, including 2 PhD candidates who were friends of mine. Actually, one was a friend, one was a relative, helping me with the proposal. Yeah. I got introduced to this agent through a friend of mine in California, and I met with him in person in his 25th story Beverly Hills office. And I presented the Plant-Based Athlete to him. He was excited about it. My then girlfriend, now wife, was with me, and we all felt good about the experience. Like, wow, I'm finally making it here. At least it felt that way.
Yeah.
And so then I sent him the actual proposal after we met in person, and he didn't like it. He didn't like the proposal at all. And so what he told me was that, Robert, this just isn't for you right now. What I want you to do is if you can come up with the money, hire someone, a ghostwriter, for about $10,000 is the number he quoted me, to help you with the proposal. And then you got to come up with, another 60,000 or so to hire the ghostwriter to write the book. But then you're going to get a home run and sell, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of books, or you'll land this big book deal. And it's kind of funny. I mean, 7-8 years later, I realized that's actually largely how the industry works. So I went back home, and I decided, you know what, I got to write an ebook or something to raise some money, because I want to pursue this dream. So I started to write this ebook. 60 pages was kind of my target, my goal. And after just a few months, I had written a 400-page book called Shred It, which was about building muscle and burning fat on a whole food plant-based diet. I got endorsed by all kinds of people. Self-published book, but endorsed by Phil Collins from Def Leppard, Emily Deschanel, for actress from Bones, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Juliana Hever, who's a registered dietitian and author of many books, and all these different people. And the book ended up selling, more than 20,000 copies at $20 each. That brought in a decent amount of income. But then I realized that, I can do this on my own then. Yeah. And
can I interrupt for 1 second? How did you get those endorsements?
Yeah. People I knew from the industry, or what I did. This is, nearly 10 years ago. But what I would do is I would wait until I see that some of these celebrity people were online on Twitter, unless they scheduled their tweet. Which I don't think a lot of people were doing back then. Like, I could tell they were on Twitter, and I would write them right then. That's how I connected with Tony Robbins. That's how I connected with Emily Deschanel. That's how I connected with, I think, Mary Pylon from the New York Times. Wow. Like, I would write them right when they were online, and I was able.
So I got to ask another follow-up question.
Yeah.
I know I'm interrupting. Can you share some of the things that you wrote to them? Like, when you DM them, what were you saying? Hey, I'm Robert. I'm putting this book together. Were you trying to get their time, a call, a meeting? What did that look like?
Yeah, I was just trying to explain who I am. At that point, I've been vegan since 1995. So at this point, I've been vegan for 18 years or something like that. And, this longtime vegan athlete. And I already published a book, and I was just trying to get an endorsement for my new book. And, some of these were just, I just got lucky. And other times, I went to events where I knew I would get the chance to bump into people. That's how I met Mike Tyson, and actually had a one-on-one conversation back when everyone had the flip phones and taking pictures. He was talking to me. I had signed a book for him, and I met him through another connection through John Pierre, who was a trainer for Ellen DeGeneres. And he's the one that connected me with Mike Tyson. Wow. And while I was at that same event, I didn't even know who Phil Collin was. Yeah. But John Pierre told me he was there to see Phil Collin. I'm like, who's that? He's a lead guitarist from Def Leppard. Oh, okay. And then I went over and introduced myself. And the next thing I knew, within 6 months, I was hanging out on the Def Leppard tour bus because I went to a show and he invited me backstage. And I've been backstage in Phoenix and Denver and Boston. Yeah. And I'm already looking at their stadium tour they got coming up with Poison and Joan Jett and whoever else. I forget who else is. Oh, and Motley Crue. Just looking at that the other day. But it started with being in those places. That's same way I met Arnold Schwarzenegger numerous times at the gym or at his actual event he puts on. And so that's what I was doing. I was writing to these people on Twitter, mostly Twitter, because it was brief, it was short. I knew it came to their phone, and that's how I connected with some of these people. So I self-published this book, and within days I had this fully funded trip to Australia. After the book came out, the book was only out for a week. In fact, I had to hire a friend to ship books for me within the US while I went to Australia for a 3-week tour, and came back and decided to, I met someone at the gym. This woman recognized me and said, "Are you Robert Cheeke?" And I said, "Yeah." And that was Vanessa Espinoza. And we basically became like best friends and training partners and co-authored a book together a few years later called Plant-Based Muscle. And then it was after that, 2018, that the same friend who introduced me to that first agent, or really my second agent, but the one in Beverly Hills, he just happened to write me out of the blue. I was living in Arizona at the time. I was actually on a speaking tour that day in Tucson, even though I lived in Phoenix. And my friend was visiting from Los Angeles and was in Phoenix and said, "Hey, you want to grab dinner?" And I was already on my way out the door. I just loaded up my car from my event in Tucson, like 6 p.m. or whatever. Yeah. And I was headed to dinner in Tucson. But my friend wrote me and said, "Hey, I'm in Phoenix." So I went to Phoenix. And it was then we sat down and he said, "Hey, Robert, I know you got all these books out now. How would you like to take another shot at the New York publishing industry, the big time?" And he had been very successful. I'll explain who he is in a moment. Yeah. And he had been very successful. I think he sold between 1 and 2 million copies of books to date. And I said, "Okay, I think I'm ready. I feel like I'm ready." Like, I know I wasn't as mature back then when I had a hard time taking feedback from that agent. That was the agent said, "Oh, I don't like the proposal." And I said, "Fine, screw this. I'm going to go, I'm going to write my own book. I don't need to pay all this money for someone else to write the book for me. I'm going to do it because I enjoy writing. I want to tell my story my way and do it." I felt like I matured a lot over those 5 years, 2013 to 2018. So I said, "Yeah, I'll take an introduction to your agent." I had no idea he meant he was going to write to that agent that night. I thought I had some time to prepare for this.
Yeah.
So shortly thereafter, I get an email from her And it took me like 2 hours to reply because I wanted to make sure I got it right, even though I was writing just a few sentences. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to, put my best self forward. And sure enough, I eventually met with her over the phone after meeting through email and sent my proposal and for the plant-based athlete again, but it was updated, of course. And a lot had changed in 5 years, many more celebrity athletes and all this stuff. And, once again, you know what I heard, Benjamin? Once again, I heard, you're not the guy to do this alone. I'm like, man, I sold 50,000 copies at this point, $20 each, $1 million worth of books, self-published, toured, and I spoke on stage in China, in Australia multiple times, in London, Toronto, Caribbean, all these places, man, and I'm still not good enough. And the agent and I tried to argue my point. I tried to argue my previous book sales. I tried to argue all these things, my connections. She said, doesn't matter. You need a co-author with this. And so I thought, man, okay, if that's the only way I'm going to get this opportunity with a major New York publisher, I'm going to have to follow that feedback, and I'm going to have to do that. And so I thought, who would be a great partner? And I immediately thought of my longtime friend, Matt Frazier, who runs No Meat Athlete, who's been running No Meat Athlete for over 10 years. I had endorsed all of his books, his No Meat Athlete book, his No Meat Athlete cookbook, his digital ebooks. He had endorsed all of my books. We had worked together for years. He runs an endurance community. No Meat Athlete is largely long distance runners and cyclists and endurance athletes. I had been running veganbodybuilding.com since 2003, mostly strength and power and bodybuilding athletes. Man, what a collaboration here. And so I flew out to the East Coast. He didn't know what I was meeting him about, but I flew out to the East Coast. I knew he was going to be at this health retreat in Deerfield Beach, Florida. He lives in North Carolina nearby. And so I flew out there, and it was just this thing, I said, hey man, let's go for a walk. So this is the moment that it happened. We were just walking on this boardwalk in Deerfield Beach. And I said, hey man, I've got this opportunity, with this agent who only works with major New York publishers. She only lands like major, 6-figure advances. Like she only does big book deals. But, and I was transparent. I was honest. I was honest with him. I said, I already wrote the proposal. I already have the concept. I've already put in the work. I got the agent. I just need someone else to do this with me. Are you interested? And he said, let's do it. He said, let's do it. Let's do it. And we decided that day, walking up and down, the Atlantic Ocean, we said, we're going to make the New York Times bestseller list. We decided that moment that was going to be our destiny. And we believed it. And that was 2.5 years before we landed at number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list.
Yeah.
And before we became a #1 international bestseller and translated into 6 languages. Nice. And #1 on Amazon in 4 categories and a Publisher's Weekly bestseller. We decided right then that was going to be our future. Yeah. And we just did what we had to do to make that happen. So it was one of those things where that, probably looking back in 2013, maybe I wasn't ready to have a major book called The Plant-Based Athlete. I wouldn't have been able to write about, former NFL MVP Cam Newton or Kyrie Irving or Chris Paul, who's in the MVP race, this incredible resurgence in his career after adopting a plant-based diet. I wouldn't have been able to write about Novak Djokovic or Serena Williams. I could have been able to write about Venus Williams or Brendan Brazier and Rich Roll and some others, but not to the level that we were able to cover in this latest version of The Plant-Based Athlete. So I think that early rejection gave me some time to write my own books, the way that I wanted to, those self-published books, and carve out my own style and travel the world and tour and speak and share that with other people. And then when my friend, I guess I never said who he was, my friend Brian, the creator of Forks Over Knives, the one who brought that movie to life and hired me in 2011 to work for Forks Over Knives, who's now sold about 2 million copies of his 5 Forks Over Knives books. He's the one that gave me that shot in 2013, saw me hustling for half a decade and not quite getting there, as far as like having my books in bookstores.
Yeah.
And gave me that shot again in 2018. And I wouldn't be here without Brian Wendell making that connection for me. And I want to say, Benjamin, it has been so cool for 33 years wanting to be an author.
Yeah.
To be able to walk into any Barnes and Noble store anywhere in America and have my book right there on the shelf, sometimes in the bestseller section or the new release section, or even featured in an end cap. And I can tell you, over the last month or so, and you know this because you emailed me when I was on the road.
Yeah,
I've signed books in 105 bookstores over the last month, because though I want it, I never know if I'm going to get this opportunity again. Right. I'm not going to let this go. I worked too hard, spent too many decades working to make the New York Times bestseller list, and having my book have a massive impact and sell tens of thousands of copies in a short amount of time, and available in all these bookstores, independent and Barnes and Noble and everywhere else around North America. I'm just not ready to let go of that. And so I visit bookstores all the time, and just yesterday I was walking the dogs and I carried some books with me. Mm-hmm. Because I stumbled upon a few of those little free libraries. They're like little tree houses. They're all around the country. And I donated to 2 of those yesterday, because I found one in my neighborhood and just happened to see one a couple neighborhoods over the other day, and then spotted yet another one yesterday. Mm-hmm. So I went out there and donated those, because it's what I've always wanted to do. And it took me so long. I'll be 42 in 2 weeks. Yeah. I'm just embracing every moment that I get.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's an amazing story. I have so many questions. A couple of things that are standing out to me is a word is perseverance. So when you think back to going back to the 3rd grade and the rejection is hard no matter who you are, especially when you have such a great passion for it. A second thing that's standing out to me is go get that cup of coffee. I did a podcast called Go Get That Cup of Coffee, where just talking to people, you have no idea what doors might be open. I do have a couple of follow-up questions. Some of these celebrities that you were reaching out to, were they all vegans at that time?
As far as people who endorsed the book, or people to
interview? Yeah, like your independent book. Yeah, so when you had your independent book out and you're getting these endorsements, were a lot of those people already living the vegan lifestyle?
Yeah, I think pretty much every one of them was, and these were sometimes movie producers, athletes, actors. I'm trying to think, like my first round of doing this, over a decade ago, like who they all were. Yeah. I don't have all their names, but I had a copy over here. I just mailed one out the other day. It's in the other room, but I remember flipping through that Shred It book that I wrote in 2014. And I was actually, I even kind of was impressed with myself. I'm like, man, I can't even reach Emily Deschanel today. I can't connect with her today, but I did back then. And like Alicia Silverstone, I was featured in her book, and she even ordered my self-published book for Hugh Jackman back when Hugh Jackman Wolverine was doing the plant-based thing. And so I actually have like her, PayPal email address in my email, and shipping it to Hugh Jackman. I remember mailing it, and they're like, is this the real like Alicia Silverstone or Hugh Jackman? I'm like, yeah, it's I met her a few times, and but I don't even know if I could reach her today. In this world of like Instagram DMs that no one's checking, TikTok, whatever, like back then. And I think, Eva, you probably know this, Benjamin, you know this, it actually was easier, I feel like, back then, when it was just like Twitter, Facebook, and stuff, to connect with people, because there were only a few platforms and people actually used them for that. Like Twitter was really easy. Like, I mean, I was connecting with Tony Robbins directly through Twitter, and ended up and he was actually, he went from being vegan for 16 years to not being vegan for a long time, which has been documented in his own talks and in a recent documentary and some of his work. And now he's back to it again. But I think I was writing to him back when he wasn't fully plant-based. And then, like you said, go get coffee, right? Yeah. I randomly met up with his nephew in Canada because my cousin is friends with Tony Robbins' nephew. So I met up with him and delivered him some stuff to give to Tony, because he was going to be going on a ski trip with Tony like the next month or something. And it's, as far as connections, really, to be honest, the best thing that I've ever done is going to events.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to the Natural Products Expo West in 3 weeks in Anaheim. It's massive. I've seen like Alicia Silverstone there. Michelle Rodriguez, she was in, what was she in at the time? Like Avatar or something. Like I bumped into her. I saw John Sally's there. I've seen Fabio there, all kinds of people. And it's one of those things, you never know who's going to be there to help you out, and not that you're looking for help, right? I had no, like when I met Phil from Def Leppard, I didn't know who he was, but I knew my friend Paul was such a big Def Leppard fan. I mean, massive Def Leppard fan. And that's what made me want to go say hi to Phil. Otherwise I, wouldn't have had that much interest. And to this day, I still keep in touch with Phil. His birthday is actually my vegan anniversary, the December 8th. We share that same day. So I'll text him, happy birthday on my vegan anniversary.
Yeah.
And like, he's been a big supporter, even though he's this, major rock star. He's down to earth guy who, has no problem like holding my book and photos and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't expect that to happen. Yeah. But I introduced my friend Paul to him, which was one of the greatest days of Paul's entire life. I'm talking about a guy who does a workout to Def Leppard concert DVD like 3 or 4 days a week. The same live concert DVDs watched for 10 years. And I was able to get my friend Paul on the Def Leppard tour bus, and he was losing his mind. Yeah. And that was so fun for me, and to be able to do that. So I'm doing this stuff, I go to these events where there's, I've seen Tim Ferriss, on tour, talk to him. I've seen Gary Vaynerchuk a bunch of times. In fact, speaking of coffee, Gary Vaynerchuk invited me to sit down for coffee at a coffee shop in Seattle, Washington, after his book talk there. So like, and he acknowledged, when I made the New York Times bestseller list, like him, he acknowledged that. And it's just been building these relationships, that you don't know what's going to happen. And you're not even, the thing is, Benjamin, you can't approach it like, okay, I want to, manipulate this person or take advantage of this opportunity. It's this genuine, authentic, like you're a fan of them or you like their work or you have something, nice to say, like that often is the best way to start developing a relationship with some of these people who we see as like celebrities or stars. And then the next thing you know, they turn around and support your work and help you do something like make a bestseller list. And it's like, man, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
But it came from this altruism, this genuine authenticity.
Yep.
And that's what's worked for me.
Yeah. No, you made me think about a book years ago. I worked for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. So I did pharmaceutical sales for about 8 years. And there was a book that I read called Never Eat Alone by Keith. I have a hard time pronouncing his name, Farazi. But it's a great book. And it's basically what you're talking about, networking, but not in the sense of, trying to deceive people or only trying to get, but there's this mutual, working together. For the people who are listening in the audience, Robert, for those who may be interested in self-publishing a book, I know it's been 10 years or so since you last did. What did you use? I've published some self-published books through Amazon Kindle. Were you using Amazon Kindle or
actually,
something else?
Actually, the last one I self-published was 2017. So it wasn't that long ago.
So it's only 5 years ago. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then I actually released an ebook even after that, 2018 or 19.
Gotcha.
It was ebook only, self-published. Just to try that. It was a book that wasn't, I don't think it was gonna be popular enough for a print book, but so ebook only. But so I started, my very first self-published book came out 2010. It was actually in print a month after I turned 30. I was trying to get it before I turned 30 because I was like beside myself, like, Robert, you're about to turn 30. You've wanted to do this since you were 8. What is taking so long? I mean, I'd become a champion bodybuilder. I've been a champion runner. I'd done all these other things. Like, why can't you write a freaking book, the thing you want to do or you claim to want to do? But it just takes a lot of focus and hard work. So at the time, there wasn't Amazon publishing back then, Amazon Kindle and all this stuff, at least not that I'm aware of. This is 12 years ago. Yep. And so I went to a local, I just looked it up. I just Googled it. It was like self-publishing houses. And there happened to be one about 3.5 hours from where I lived. I lived in Corvallis, Oregon, where I'm from. I was back living there again. And this publishing house was in Bend, Oregon, called Maverick Publications. No idea if they're still around. I hope so. But so Maverick Publications, and I reached out to them, and I was really hands-on, like they're like, yeah, just send your materials or whatever. I'm like, no, I'm driving out there. So I drove out there. They're like, yeah, we're not used to like people showing up at our office, but that's cool.
Yeah.
And so I would drive out there, every once in a while, every couple months or whatever. And it was beautiful, actually. Like if you were to go back and look now, for the most part, that book, Vegan Bodybuilding, like the layout, like it looked like it was professionally done, and that was before all the really fancy tools that we have now, where someone, you can hire someone from Upwork and they can do all this stuff. Before, you had to go to like a book publisher who knew how to, make it look like a book. And so I did that, but I was paying like, man, I told you I borrowed that $6,000 to publish it. So I printed about 1,000 copies, I think. And that was $7 or $8 per book, I think, at the time. So my total cost was, I don't know, $8,000 or something like that to get those first ones. And the only reason I was able to do that was I borrowed the money and I was taking pre-orders. I was taking money in advance so I could pay to do that. Because then you got to print more and you have to come up with the money up front, and it's tough. And I really struggled to keep up with that, to the point that I couldn't do it anymore. Eventually I was printing 250 at a time for like $10 or $11 a copy and trying to sell them for 20, and just the other cost of shipping and storage and whatever. And then the Amazon Kindle publishing, or whatever it's called now, came along. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's what I used for my Shred It book. I'm not totally sure now. Looking back, I'm gonna think about it. You know what? No. I used Maverick Publications again. That's right. Because I had a companion book to it, that little training journal, 13-week training journal, which was spiral bound. And that was just designed to get you through a quarter of the year, 13 weeks, 26, 39, 52. And that's right, because they did that. They did my Shred It book, which was even better than the Vegan Bodybuilding one as far as layout, and it just looked really professional. And it had all these like famous people endorsing it. So I used that. And then that's right. It was Amazon Direct Publishing, or they changed their name to Kindle Publishing or something in 2017, where I hired someone from Upwork. And it was like something like only $1,500 to hire someone to do the layout for something they spent months working on. I almost felt bad, like they were underpaid, because it just was back and forth. Mm-hmm. They were in another continent and trying to, the time zones, and just trying to just get everything together. Mm-hmm. But it was really good. It was really good and nicely done. And to this day, and we eventually uploaded Shred It to Amazon Publishing. And it was like a breakup, to be honest, Benjamin. It was hard, because these guys in Bend, Oregon, this little town in my home state, who had this little operation, had published 2 of my books, but I could do it so much cheaper with Amazon. So I had to ask them, like, hey, it was like that breakup thing. Can I get the master file from you? I own the property, right? I own the intellectual property. I hired them as a contractor, basically. I hired them to do the layout. It was still my stuff, but I basically had to fire them as politely as I could and say, may I get that master file? The only way for me to be sustainable with this is if I go with Amazon. And now it costs me about, for that Shred It book, which is big, 340 pages or so, lots of photos and everything, I believe it's $5.19 per copy. And I was paying, that book was bigger, I think, than my Vegan Bodybuilding book. So I may have been paying $8, $9 a copy. So I cut my cost in half, and with no minimums. I can order one if I want from Amazon. Yeah. And then that plant-based muscle book is a little bit shorter, 262 pages, I believe. And it's cost me $3.99. And I resell for $20. And of course, that you got to pay a little bit for shipping, to get them from Amazon. But there's just print on demand, you know how that works. So that's how I approach that. And so it hasn't been that long since I've self-published. And one of the things I will say is that the number one thing, really, to me, the number one thing with a major New York publisher is distribution, is to be in every bookstore, and to be in thousands of bookstores. And they can help with a few other things, from maybe some of their connections, some of their marketing, or connect you with a publicist, but they don't do a whole lot besides that. And I was told that by other publishers too. You know how it works. I mean, you launch a book, they give you help for a few weeks, and then it's on to the next book. You know, I was gonna say, maybe I shouldn't even say this, but I can't even get them to reply to me. I mean, I wrote a New York Times best-selling book for them, which has already sold, I think, $900,000 worth of books in 7 or 6 months for them. They won't even reply to my emails. When I have genuine questions about, like, trying to get, where are they? Trying to get these signed book plates, that, to ship out to bookstores around the country. They never sent 3 or 4 emails over the course of 2 months. They won't reply. So my wife designed some, and we're paying out of pocket and doing all the signing and shipping ourselves. And so what I tell people is, if you have an audience of any type, whether that's regionally, online, globally, whatever, self-publishing can be a great way to go. Yep. I mean, still to this day, I'm still waiting on some royalty checks from this book, but the most money I ever made from the book was from Shred It, a self-published book that just somehow connected. It just, the right place, the right time, the right people endorsing it, it just took off. And it's a springboard for me to get also paid speaking gigs around the world from that book.
Yeah.
And so self-publishing can be a fantastic way to go. You get full creative control. I lost them. I had to give up some creative control with my new book. But at the same time, I love the distribution. I love being able to walk into a bookstore and just be able to I walk right to the customer service desk and say, hey, I'm your local New York Times bestselling author. Just want to sign some books in your store. And they love it, and I wouldn't have that in a self-published world. It's very hard. You can, but it's very hard to get your books out there in these major retailers as a self-published author.
So share with the audience, the feedback that I've gotten since becoming vegan, and I know there's a variety of reasons as to why people become vegan. I've gotten a lot of encouragement. People typically ask questions, the common questions that you've heard a million times. When you were writing The Plant-Based Athlete, did you have yourself in mind, like when you were 15, like, okay, if I could go back in time, this would be a book that I would want to be able to pick up in a bookstore? I know you have all of these, highly professional athletes. How did that work with that process of who you were writing to and, people who could get benefit out of the book?
Yeah, well, one thing, and this is maybe just a tip for anybody who's interested in writing, is that one thing to keep in mind, and maybe this is just my perspective, but as an author, especially this kind of book, of a prescriptive type book, maybe narrative storytelling, first person, informational, really what I would just call is really kind of a prescriptive book, that you're never really writing for yourself. Every sentence has to benefit the reader, or else it needs to be removed. Even if it's like your favorite, like, man, I love that sentence. I love the way I put the words together. Or I want to tell my own story. Like, this reminds me of this time I did this. I'm going to put that in there. If the reader doesn't care, it's got to go. And that was hard for me to learn. It was hard for me to let go of that, especially because my first book was a little more memoir style. It was my vegan bodybuilding journey plus a bunch of tips in there. My other books were much more prescriptive about, here's a meal plan to follow, here's a workout plan to follow. It was very much like, and I hired editors back then too, even with my self-published books. I hired some professional editors. And that's something that I had to take into account. And so as I was writing the book, that's really the thing I was thinking about. Not necessarily how would this serve, me looking back as a 15-year-old becoming vegan back in 1995, but how is it going to serve readers today? Yeah. And what will they get out of this? And that's why I did all the storytelling. That's why I did all those interviews with the athletes. I wanted it to be compelling. I wanted it to be emotional. I wanted people to be moved by it. I want people to, you look at some of these athletes who overcame drug addiction, who overcame suicide attempts and became Olympic athletes. People who one guy was over 420 pounds and became an ultra marathon champion. Not just a guy who shows up and puts a bib on and runs slowly, but a guy who wins, who now weighs like 180 something pounds. And he did it all just through diet and exercise and determination and grit and passion and all that. And people who overcame eating disorders, people who overcame abuse and became world champion in their sport. Like, everybody has a story, and it's not an easy road to becoming a champion athlete or someone who is that we look up to as celebrity status or significant in their sport or anything like that. There's this road of struggle that many of us can relate to. And so that's what I really wanted to write about and to tell. And that's why I chose to do things like a day in the life routine. That spoke to me. I would love to see what these Olympic athletes do behind the scenes, or these champion MMA athletes or fellow bodybuilders or endurance athletes. How does it differ than what I do? And then just be inspired by, like, wow, that's tremendous commitment. I mean, they're already on their bike when I'm still sleeping. They put in 100 miles on the bike when I'm, still checking my email. And it's not a comparison thing, but it's like, it's a source of inspiration for me. There's room for me to do more. And especially, Benjamin, I'll tell you, one of the things I was really inspired by were I think I interviewed about 5 athletes who are still competitive and still very good, including one just set a world record. Actually, I found out he set 2 world records. I didn't realize that. These 5 athletes who are over 50. Because I'm even though I'm in my early 40s, I start to connect with the older athletes now. I'm not that, I don't connect with like a 22-year-old fitness model anymore. I just don't. That's not me. I've got the low back soreness from 25 years of lifting. I'm in my 40s. I don't burn fat as easily. I have other projects going on, other priorities with family and work and all this stuff. And I relate much more to Rip Esselstyn, who's almost 60. I think he turns 60 next year, and Rich Roll, who's 55, and Fiona Oakes, who's in her 50s. And by the way, been plant-based for 5 decades, for over 50 years, and has multiple Guinness World Records. And Christine Barderos, who I met, I don't know, for the first time, we crossed paths like 20 years ago, and she's been vegan for more than 20 years, and she's in her 50s as a professional cyclist. And my friend John, who's a Ironman triathlete who does full Ironman distance, bikes 112 miles, or swims 2.4, bikes 112, runs 26.2 all on the same day. And he turns 60 next year. And like that inspires me, because sometimes I feel like, man, I'm in my 40s now. I gotta start thinking about, hanging up the, all this weight training stuff. It's like, it's fun to kind of like have the sleeves be tight on you. And,
that's right.
It might be coming through the camera, maybe not.
You're looking good, dude. No, you're looking good, bro.
I'm 215 pounds or so, up a full 100 pounds when I became vegan. And it's kind of fun to hang on to that. Yeah. But it's a lot of work, and it takes a toll. Lifting weights is hard on the body. And sometimes I think, well, maybe I should do something different. But then I look at these other athletes, including strength and power athletes who are in their 50s, and I'm like, oh, I got plenty of time. If I choose to pursue it, if I deem that worthy of pursuing, that's what motivated me. So that's where the writing style came from. It was like, what will the reader get out of this? And what was really cool is because even though I do have a co-author, but I did the vast majority of the writing. That was just, I'd already done a ton of it and updated it and wrote more of it. And that was our arrangement as co-authors, that I would do more of the writing, my co-author would do more of the marketing. Even as someone who wrote the book, I actually benefited as a reader. All the times I went through editing it, revising it, was like, I would get motivated. I would get inspired. And that's when I realized that I'm writing for others, but at the same time, it helped me. If that makes sense. I wasn't even looking to get that out of it. I was trying to create art for other people to benefit from, and I ended up benefiting from it as well. And that's as good as it gets for me. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So take us back to when you were 15. With everything you now know, when you made that decision to become vegan, what would you do differently, if anything? Would you do anything else differently? Oh, I would do a ton of things differently. I mean, I grew up on a farm. I come from a farming background. My parents come from a farming background. I'm 15 years old, high school kid, didn't have a lot of my own money. I was eating mostly the same foods that everybody else eats, but a vegan version of them. So just like, pasta and chips and salsa and bread and soda and candy. I mean, what teenagers eat. And so I wasn't doing this tremendous nutrition program back then. But as we all know, when you're young, especially as a teenager in your early 20s, you can get away with anything. I mean, wasn't it, Lamar Odom, who was famous for being an NBA basketball player on like an all candy diet, basically. You see these guys, these incredible specimens in football and basketball who are just eating fast food. And granted, that comes back, later on. I mean, all this, the buildup of plaque and arteries and all this stuff can be damaging to their health later on. But that's what I was doing, was just eating a lot of kind of plant-based junk food back then, because that's what teenagers were doing. And so looking back, I would, because habits are formed, oftentimes at a young age, and you continue to, sometimes it could be decades later, you still have those routines of, okay, I drink this, I'm a person who drinks orange juice or eats pizza or eats bagels. Like that's who we are. I have cereal, whatever. And so I would have done things a little bit differently. Looking back, I would have, I grew up on a farm, so I would have eaten a lot more fresh produce. I would have eaten a lot more things from the garden. I would have maybe structured meal plans a little bit differently, that kind of thing. I also maybe would have presented veganism differently as well, because I came to it from an animal rights perspective, which is still my driving force today, where my compassion lies, and the reason why I do what I do and everything is to make a difference for animals. As someone who grew up around farm animals and was surrounded by them and had them as pets, cows and chickens and rabbits and all these other animals as pets, like that means a lot to me. But I was also very passionate, even if it was a flip of a switch. One day I'm eating a burger from McDonald's, and the next day I'm introduced to factory farming and animal testing on a large scale, and all of a sudden I've become a different person as far as my perspectives and beliefs and viewpoints, which change overnight. And then I was pretty outspoken about that, and sometimes critical of my other friends who weren't on board with what I was doing, even though I'd only been on board with it for a week myself. And, I think I could have been a bit more of an effective advocate and activist for animal rights if I had, taken a much warmer approach, which is honestly, I have to say, one of the reasons why we picked, plant-based instead of vegan for this, just to reach a mainstream audience. I've already written books that have vegan in the name, like Vegan Bodybuilding, or How to Build a Successful Vegan Brand, that ebook I wrote. It's got vegan right there in the name. But things like Shred It, Plant-Based Muscle, Plant-Based Athlete, it's a little more welcoming, I think, to a larger audience. It doesn't mean that I'm any less, vegan as far as how I identify with myself or how I interact in the world around me. But I want to bring more people into the fold, and sometimes this is a little bit easier way to get them interested.
Yeah. People have a lot of questions about the plant-based lifestyle, and I want to play a game with you now. It's called Fact or Fiction.
Okay.
And let's see if we can answer some questions that a lot of people have. Fact or fiction? I just saw this on Facebook this morning. You have to eat 6 meals per day to burn fat and to keep blood sugars level. What do you say to that? Is that fact or fiction?
I would probably say fiction, although I don't know the exact science on that. But I know a lot of athletes who graze all day long, so they might have like 12 meals. I also know people who eat 3 meals a day, 4 meals a day, bodybuilders who have very specific regimen. I personally have used a 6 meal a day approach. That's like that, I did that with the Body for Life program back in the late 90s or early 2000s.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually I do document. You should see my desk. There's just papers everywhere. I do document sometimes for weeks at a time, everything that I eat throughout the day. Ooh, it's way more than 6 meals. There's small things. But it's a lot more than 6 times a day, because that just makes me, constantly fueled throughout the day. You're talking like, some stuff in the morning for breakfast or pre-workout, post-workout, lunch, meals, dinner, snacks, whatever. It adds up. So my quick answer is probably fiction, because there's so many different approaches that still lead to desired results as long as you're consistent over time.
Okay. Fact or fiction, you can't build muscle on a plant-based diet.
That is fiction. I started out as 120 pounds at 15 years old, and I've been up to 220 pounds recently. Currently, cutting down a little bit. So I put on 100 pounds on a plant-based diet, and I'm just one of many, many people who have done that. And it's one thing that's great, I think, in part of my story is that I've documented all of that. I have the photos from when I became vegan at age 16, even with my shirt off, sitting there like this, 120 pound guy. Then I have the photos next to it with obviously that are, decades later, or even some that are 7 years later, where I put on 75 pounds in something like 7 years. So absolutely fiction. That's something that really needs to be articulated and communicated a lot more, that you can absolutely build muscle on a plant-based diet.
Fact or fiction, you're not going to be able to get enough protein on a plant-based diet.
That's fiction too. Protein is one of the easiest things to get, period. Okay. And that's just because of the macronutrient breakdown of food, right? So almost all foods have protein, carbohydrates, and fats to some degree. And we're talking about protein, coming from amino acids, the building blocks of protein. Amino acids are present in all foods. And you get complete protein, by the way, too. All the essential amino acids are all found in plants as well. Some in larger amounts, some in smaller amounts, but we collect those throughout the entire day through all of our meals. There's no need to, combine rice and beans in a single meal or anything like that. Our body collectively utilizes all of these amino acids we get throughout the day. And the reality is, just purely based on statistics and what people actually consume, the reality is many people throughout America and the Western world consume 2, 3, 4, 5 times more protein than they actually require, than they actually need. And if more were better, that would be great, but more is not better for a lot of reasons. It could potentially have adverse effects on kidneys, on liver, on other organs. It often comes with, what does protein come in? Often the form meat, right? So often it could be a class 1, class 2A carcinogen, could be linked to development of these specific cancers, which is as close related as cigarette smoking and lung cancer in some cases, especially with processed meats. How does it also come? How do you typically consume high protein food? Typically it's animal protein, and it comes with a lot of extra fat. It comes with it, whether it's cooked in oils or deep fried or all these condiments on it, tons of excess calories, comes with white refined buns, bread rolls, hot dog buns, hamburger buns, that kind of thing, typically covered in butter or cheese or other things added to it, incredibly calorie dense, which leads to obesity, which 42.5% of Americans are obese, 73.6% are overweight. And again, that wouldn't be a problem if it didn't lead to an increased risk of nearly all-cause mortality, particularly heart attack, stroke, heart disease, development of certain cancers, type 2 diabetes, which is a massive one, hypertension, and can even, a study I saw recently, could even contribute to Alzheimer's too, carrying around excess weight. And so look at this, Benjamin, our collective desire to consume more protein has actually been one of the largest detriments to our overall health. Yes. Because as it turns out, animal protein isn't all that good for us after all. And it comes with all this extra baggage. It comes with dietary cholesterol, which is only found in animal foods. It is not found in plants. And animal protein does not contain any fiber, none whatsoever. And 97% of Americans do not get enough fiber. It has 1/64th the antioxidant level of plants, and really the only way it gets that 1/64th in the first place is the plants the animals ate, which is where antioxidants originate. Same with things like omega-3 essential fats, which everyone thinks fish oil. And I was just listening to Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, the best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author of Fiber Fueled, just 2 days ago, making the point, and he's a tremendous doctor. He's a practicing physician and has all kinds of, accolades and everything. He's a very smart guy. And he was making the point that no animal creates omega-3 essential fats. They all consume it and absorb it and pass it along. Like fish get it from algae, fish get it from whatever they eat. And so there's some other ways to do that. So protein is just one of those things that we obsess about it.
Yep.
It's one of the greatest marketing campaigns in nutrition I've ever seen. I wrote about it in the book, an entire
Yep.
section about
Yep.
how that happened, post World Wars and the masculinity aspect of it, and providing for our family, and these and the rise of TV dinners and microwaves and everything that made consuming animals easier, factory farms, all this stuff, and the fact that you can literally go right now, Benjamin and Eva, you can go to a store, go down the street, whether walk, get in the car, go to a store. You can find protein water. You can find protein popcorn. You can find protein potato chips. You can find protein added to anything, because guess what? It sells.
Sells money. Yeah.
It makes money.
Yeah.
Does anybody need to use a protein powder? No, nobody. But it's this multi-billion-dollar industry. Can some people benefit from it? Sure, probably. People who are spending hours in the gym exercising, and it's harder to consume large amounts of food in whole food form if you're looking to specifically consume a very specific amount of protein as a bodybuilder or power lifter. But how many of those people are out there? 0.0001% of the population. So that's a very long answer, but it's a very important question, because it's the number one question you get. No doubt, 38 days in, where do you get your protein?
Yep.
I mean, come on. The shortest answer, which I will say here, a little sound bite here, is that if you consume adequate calories, you'll get adequate protein. So based on your true calorie needs, and that's important. What are your calorie needs compared to Eva's calorie needs? Vastly different, right? You have to be different sizes, different gender, different ages, different activity levels. Yeah. Sure, all three of us have a different calorie need, and you discover that through the Harris-Benedict calculator, Harris-Benedict equation. That is, based on your gender, age, height, weight, and very importantly, your activity level. How many calories do you expend per day? I mean, are you someone who walks and bikes, for hours a day? Or are you someone who has a physical job that goes to the gym 7 days a week, or not? Someone who sits in a chair for 12 hours a day, whatever the case is, and what's your, basal metabolic rate on top of that? What are you naturally burning just based on your body type? And then you figure out, okay, what your calorie needs are. Then that's when you determine what to eat. And as soon as you reach your calorie needs, you're going to essentially hit your protein goal, your target, without any effort whatsoever. Even if you were to eat just a really, really boring, bland diet, you'd still reach it. And so most people walking around that you see every day are eating excess protein, which, as I already alluded to, is a lot of excess calories, a lot of excess fat, a lot of excess storage of unutilized protein that just adds to body weight, body mass. And now we have 73.6 of us who are overweight in America. And that's not to body shame a single person. That's to sound the alarm that this is a gateway to our most common degenerative diseases. And do we want to have those, or do we not? And how can we change that?
Full disclosure, I mean, that's been my mindset for years. I did Body for Life. I got a chance to speak at Bill Phillips camps a couple of times. And it worked. I typically would lose about 20 pounds or something like that. And protein shakes. I'm still using Huel, Huel, a vegan shake smoothie, a big smoothie in the morning. When I got started, I wanted to make it as easy as possible because of such a big shift. When I was reading your book and even working with Eva, the carbs, and I think so much of this is just my mindset throughout the years. And I looked at some of these ratios, even some of the recipes. I'm like, man, there's a lot of carbs in this milk. Yeah. So fact or fiction, carbs are the enemy when it comes to weight loss, or when it comes to getting in great shape.
Carbs are the best macronutrient you can possibly consume, in my opinion, because they represent the calories of the best foods. The best foods on the planet, you know what those are? Those are leafy green vegetables. And this is based on things like the Andy score, the aggregate nutrient density index, which takes in like 37 factors of what foods have the most nutrients per calorie. Yeah. Leafy greens by far, number one, best food you can possibly consume. Fruit, legumes are right behind there. And of course, seeds, which are, they sprout life, basically. Seeds are another really great one, but who's eating like a bowl full of sesame seeds for a meal? Nobody. You don't have like this giant pizza, plate full of chia seeds. Nobody would do that, but they're still really beneficial. But no, carbohydrates are not the enemy. You know why? Benjamin, what do we associate with carbohydrates? Oftentimes it's, I don't know, like pizza's got a lot of carbs,
Cookies, pasta.
donut.
Yep.
These things are mostly fat. In many
Yep.
cases, they're not mostly carbs. Just like, you know what? Go look at any protein bar that you can find, especially plant-based protein bars. None of these are actually protein bars. Look at, because we know how many calories per gram in protein and carbohydrates and fat. Almost any protein bar on the market you can find, protein bar in big letters, is either a carbohydrate bar or a fat bar. Things are not often what they seem. So we think, oh, carbohydrates are bad, all these foods are carbs. Well, many of the foods people are thinking of are processed foods that are very, very high in fat. That's for one. And they're heavily processed and all that. When I talk about carbohydrates, I am talking about blueberries, about sweet potatoes, about yams, about oats, about rice and lentils and beans and vegetables and fruits, broccoli, all these types of things. That's what I'm talking about, carbohydrate fuel. And those, guess what? They're some of the lowest foods on the calorie density scale. That's why you can't overeat leafy greens. You just can't. They're only like 60 calories per pound. Mm-hmm. Compare that to oil at 4,000 calories per pound, or most meat that's over 1,000 calories per pound. There's no comparison. It's very hard to overeat on vegetables. Their volume is so high. You can't you overeat potatoes and yams. You're full after, a couple of them, and you didn't get a ton of calories, but you got lots of nutrition. And so that's at the end of the day, whether we're going to add mass or lose mass, gain weight, lose weight, a lot of that has to do with how many calories we consume versus how many calories we expend, and the nature of those calories coming from mostly carbohydrates. And I'm talking about whole food, plant-based, real carbohydrates filled with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytonutrients, fiber, and water. That should be the foundation of a diet. And that's true for Olympic athletes as it's true for your neighbor. It doesn't matter. It helps us all. And those are the foods that fight off disease as well. And the foods that make us feel energized to then go actually do things like exercise and do things that, again, promote and further our overall health. So whatever the question was, I think the answer was fiction, that carbohydrates are not the enemy. Carbohydrates are your best ally in this quest, even for losing weight, because they're low in total calories and high in nutrition. And that's what we want.
Well, I've seen that firsthand, and I've been amazed just looking at the results, just seeing with the potatoes and everything like that, and my protein content going down compared to what I was doing. So the evidence is certainly there.
And final cholesterol, your cholesterol numbers dropping majorly in just 35 days.
Yeah. I had my blood work done a couple of days ago. My total cholesterol dropped about 53 points.
Wow, congratulations.
LDL, dropped about 40. So I still got a little work to do, but it's been mind-boggling to see it. And 10 years ago, I had a list. I used to do these healthy recipe exchanges, and I put together this top 10 list of books for fitness and health. So one of the books was the China study, had that on there. One of the books was the Engine 2 diet, but I never fully committed. What do you say, Robert, to the person who's listening to this, who's on the verge of, they know they have to make some changes, but the whole idea of being vegan or plant-based is scary. What do you say to the person who is just trying to maybe take that next step or get started? What words of wisdom would you like to give to them?
Yeah. First, I'd ask why.
Okay.
What do you want to get out of this thing? You know that I already told you the latest stats from the CDC or from whatever authority, I think it might have been CDC, 74% of us are overweight. And we know that leads to problematic conditions, whether that's just fatigue climbing the stairs at home, or walking or feeling uncomfortable, or joint pain, or the development of plaque in our arteries, which we know could lead to some cardiac issue that would be very, very scary and could be fatal. What's your driving force? Why do you want to do this? Because once you discover why, you can be much more committed. Because it reminds me of a quote from H. Jackson Brown Jr. From his book, P.S. I Love You, when he said 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the things that you did do. And so many of us ask that question, like, what might have been? Like, man, I waited so long to tackle this issue of my health and wellness and fitness and make a commitment that now I have this issue or this condition, or maybe I've got, type 2 diabetes for the rest of my life now, or I have this, whatever the situation is, or I have to work incredibly hard to now attempt to reverse this endothelial cell damage, this plaque buildup in arteries that I have to take seriously, or else it could be a very scary situation with lack of blood flow and having a cardiac issue. Do I want that or do I not want that? And so, and also understand that we've got 1,440 minutes every day. We're often only asking for 40 minutes of your time.
Yep.
40 minutes. I don't know what the math is on that. I haven't done the fraction, but it's not significant. 40 minutes of exercise, going for a walk, riding the bike, whatever, or taking the time to meal prep. And also that from a more practical standpoint, perhaps, I mentioned this in the book too, if you are interested in this plant-based diet for whatever reason, first you got to have that compelling reason. But once you figure that out, what do you like to eat that's already plant-based? I listed all those different categories of foods. Like there's so many things that you probably already like that are already plant-based, especially all fruits and vegetables and things like soups and chili and tacos, burritos, whatever. It's so easy. They're already essentially mostly meat-free, salads and all this stuff. Noodle dishes, pastas, they're already, primarily plant-based. And so identify what you enjoy, because it's got to be fun. It's got to be enjoyable, or you're not going to stick with it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, how many of us don't do lunges because they're not very fun, or do pull-ups at the gym? We'll find anything we can do, because we just don't want to do those. They hurt. They're too hard. That's why we walk instead of run. It just takes more effort. I'd rather not do it. We would take the elevator instead of the stairs. Why do we do that? Because we're trying to conserve energy and we're trying to feel better, and we don't want to exert ourselves if we don't have to, unless we're running after someone or running away from someone. Like we don't want to exert the stuff. But if we change our mindset and say, you know what, I put in a little bit of time, a little bit of effort to meal prep something, maybe make some plant-based meals that are going to last me a few days and whatever. So then I'm not tempted to reach out for junk food or the food that I know is going to be adverse for my health. And I'm committed because I want to see these changes for whatever those reasons are. I want to feel more comfortable. I want to feel more confident. I want to look differently in my clothes. I want to be around longer to hang out with my grandkids, or I want to just feel better physically, not get winded, going up the stairs or whatever the case is. Think about those things. I didn't really get a chance to talk about it today, Benjamin, but I've really been big on connecting the dots ahead of time. From when I was that third grade kid, I knew I was going to write a book. I knew it took me a while, but I knew I was going to get there. When I was that 120-pound vegan kid, lifting weights, I knew I was going to be a champion bodybuilder someday. I pictured it. I saw it way off in the distance, and you've got to do that, especially with things like weight loss goals or committing to a diet change. Like, yeah, it may be hard today, but man, 6 months from now, 18 months from now, 3 years from now, who am I going to be? Like, and what do I need to do today to become the person that I'm going to become? And when you can think in those kind of terms, you're motivated, you're inspired to want to do it, and then just find the practical tips of having the foods in your house that you already know that you like. My friend Chef AJ says, especially talking about food and food addiction, if it's in your house, it's in your mouth. There's going to be times you bring all these, junk foods in, cookies, whatever, all this stuff, which are totally okay to have sometimes. But, if they're in our house, eventually willpower is going to, fall to the wayside, and broccoli is not going to look very appetizing when there's cookies there, or when there's chocolate, or when there's popsicles, or when there's, all this stuff. And so ice cream, and nothing wrong with those foods, especially if we're doing exercise and we're committed to a healthy diet, and we have this balance, it's a great relationship with food. But to keep that in mind too, that, if we are trying to, so in this case, what I'm, suggesting is, okay, we're new to this thing. Let's keep the meat out of the house. Let's keep the dairy out of the house. And let's say you're still trying to figure things out. Then maybe that's a meal to be reserved for weekends at a restaurant or something as you're adapting and transitioning. Because as much as from an animal rights perspective, I'd love people to go vegan overnight, statistically, most people stick with it for the long haul when they kind of ease into it rather than just stopping, because that's like any habit that we have, trying to change it immediately. Like if I said, Benjamin, I want you to start training for a marathon tomorrow, and I want your first run to be about 12 miles. That's too much to take on, man. Yeah. But I want you to run, down the block, for about a minute and a half. And the next day I want you to go for 2 minutes. The next day I'd like you to get hit 2.5 minutes. The next day 3 minutes. Sure enough, a few months later you run a marathon, and now you're a runner, and you adapted to it, and you can stick with it for years or for a lifetime. And so that's what I would tell people. Find what you love to eat, keep it around, keep it accessible, reduce the temptation by keeping things out of the house, and know why you're doing it. And picture yourself 5 years from now, 5 months from now, 5 weeks from now. What does life look like then? Yeah. And is it worth committing to your goals today to get to where you're going to be then?
Yeah. Now, well said, Robert. This has been an absolute delight. I think we could talk for another hour or so, but I want to be respectful of your time. To the audience, remember the question he just mentioned. Who do you want to be? And I think that's so important. Who do you want to be today, a month from now, 3 months from now, 3 years from now? And the great thing about it is that we can actually make decisions to accomplish those goals. So it's been great to have you on, Robert and Eva. Now, I have to ask one more request. You're a bodybuilder. You've been a bodybuilder for a long time. I got to get a flex shot with you, all right? Before I hang up, all right? So give me a little flex pose.
Oh, man, let's
oh, man. Yeah, I love it.
That's the good angle. Thank you so much, Benjamin, and Eva. Thank you so much for the role that you've played in this transformation for Benjamin as well, and leading by example and committing to making the world a better place through helping people become the best versions of themselves. And that's just a trickle effect. And now we all can spread that positivity to other people. So it takes a support network. It takes people in our corner. It takes people saying, you can do this. And I support you, and I'm here for you. And I'm here to answer questions for you. And if you have anything, you can lean on me. If you have questions, you can come to me. And so, Eva, I want to thank you for the role that you play in the lives of others, and the contributions that you make to making the world a more compassionate place. So
thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you. And Benjamin, thanks for having me on, and thanks for the great questions, and allowing me to tell a little bit about my writing story as well, and not just my veganism, not just my bodybuilding, but about this other meaningful journey that I've been so fortunate to be on, and allow me to share that with your audience. So I appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Eva, and thank you, Robert. And for all of those who are listening, thank you so much for tuning in. I can do, so can you. Keep going after it, and the best is yet to come. Take care.